You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale. This series is sponsored by the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. To learn more about REEB and its mentoring scheme, visit prca.org.uk/REEB.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gems in Comms series special, brought to you by 9 to 5 Work Rebels. I am your host, Ebony Gale, and today I'm excited to be speaking with Juanita Rosenior, who is the MD at the Girl in the Red Glasses, known as TGRG, about her journey into PR and comms industry. Now, of course, welcome, Juanita.
Thank you, Ebony. I've seen your podcast pop up and people get excited and stuff. So when you emailed, I was like, oh, I'm that girl now because I've got an invite. Seriously. So I'm really chuffed. I'm that girl. I'm the girl in the red glasses. So yes, so I'm really, really, really chuffed for the invite. Thank you.
No, you are most welcome. Now, I want to say, the podcast essentially is about giving, melanated people of color. I'm trying to move away from people of color because I find it an annoying statement. So the global majority, okay?
Oh, I love those.
The global majority, yes. Okay, of people who are working in the comms and PR and marketing advertising industries who have carved out a really great career for themselves. So kudos to you and well done to you.
And you too, because comms is a baptism of fire.
Yes, so. Absolutely. So I wanted you to start off, please, by telling us about yourself, what it is that you do, and have you always wanted to work in sort of PR and comms?
So TGRG, we're a Marcoms PR and talent management agency. We've been running since 2017, so we're about to turn 8 next year. Yeah. We moved into talent towards the end of 2019. So essentially, I work with people to kind of build their personal brands, essentially, and also build them as businesses. So there's PR elements to that, but it's a slightly different output. But I have been in comms, I feel like forever, because I think I always consider my first comms role was when I was about 10, 11. And there was an organization called Children's Express. And it was an American organization that had come over to the UK. And what it really wanted to do was to get young people to be at the forefront of news. So I'm about to show how old I was. I'd seen this segment about them on London Weekend Television. Do you remember that? London Weekend Television? Actually, let me not assume that you remember London Weekend Television.
Yeah, I kind of do. Yes, I do.
And I spent weeks looking through the yellow pages, still aging myself, trying to figure out who this organization was. Finally got in touch with them and ended up starting a journalistic career. So I was first published in The Independent when I was about 10, talking about homework and whether or not homework was something that people should have and how much impact it was having on young people's lives. And then I went on to do some TV, presenting some segments for BBC, did some work at uni, and have been in comms ever since. So I feel like I was naturally inclined to communicate, to storytelling, and that has been my journey. And again, as well as working with brands to tell their story from a PR point of view, a good chunk of my work now is helping individuals tell their story.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, very interesting. And from 10 years old, I mean, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? So talk about your homework, little writer.
I know, isn't it? It was a good opportunity. It's a shame. I think there's similar things like that happening now with things like Coco Girl, their academy. Yes. But there hasn't been anything like that for a long time. And I think one of the things that I know, having spoken to some people in the past, is about being in this space and the opportunities. Sometimes you can be the only one in the room. And I don't think we sometimes acknowledge actually how difficult that is. Mm-hmm. But I do value those kind of opportunities and do encourage people who are children to encourage their children to get involved in things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a very good thank you for that. And what would you say attracted you to the industry? Like, is it because you just started writing when you was younger and you just thought, actually, this is just what I like? Like, was there anything in particular as you got older that you thought this is where I need to be?
No, I just think it's just, like I said, I just think I'm naturally inclined. I went so far as Vauxhall Park was near me, and I was part of the Friends of Vauxhall Park, and I used to, write news stories for their newsletter and all kinds of things. So I just think that for as long as I can remember, writing was just something that I was always passionate about. And then moving into comms, going to uni and seeing different workspaces, the strategic elements of it, building brands, those that they're just natural positions for me, to be honest, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like that. Thank you for sharing. Now,
Of
moving a little bit
course.
into your lived experiences, I always ask my guests, when do you become aware of your ethnicity? Not to say that you don't know you're a beautiful black woman, or you didn't know you're a beautiful
Yeah.
black girl when you was born. No, I definitely knew that, but it was more of a case of, when the outside world meets you. So for me, it was heading off to
Yeah.
secondary school and hearing about Chelsea Smilers and then being racist thugs and, cutting people in their faces. So I remember being quite aware, staunch aware as when it kind of met my world. Do you have anything like that kind of signifies, or when you became kind of aware of it?
Um, I don't think so. I think for me though, I think there was a shift when I went to uni. So I went to uni in Preston,
Okay.
which is in between, like it's around that kind of Manchester area. And at that point, Preston had just been made the 20th city, but it's a town. And
Okay.
it's one of those things where there are very few Black people there. But I wanted to go there because I was going to do American Studies and media studies, which I ended up doing American Studies and journalism. And I think I really came into my blackness
Mm.
then, and not necessarily in the most aggressive ways. I mean, I'm a South London girl, do you know what I mean? So we've got
Okay.
a lot of culture, a lot of great stuff in South London. No one can come and fight me on that.
Yeah.
But I think being in an environment where I was in the minority and I got into things like Black films, like Love Jones and The Best Man and all that kind of stuff, really brought me home to myself.
Mm.
And that's something I particularly love. I think maybe I've gone too far about it, but that's one thing that my son, who's 16, he knows about his mum. His mum is blackity black, 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 black,
Yeah.
black, black, and unapologetic about that. And I had done a lot of work in my career where a good chunk of my career has been about supporting my community. So my first business, Afrobase, was marketing specifically for Black organizations because I felt like they didn't have access to um, the kind of marketing skill that businesses need to succeed.
Mm.
Um, so I've always been about community. I don't shy away from it. But I think that was the moment where it was like, do you know what? I love being a Black woman. And yeah, it really came home for me then.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. So, looking at your career, have you ever felt like your race, ethnicity has held you back in your career at all?
Um, I think that it's such a multifaceted question that I think it depends on what your journey is.
Mhm.
So for me, I think more so the thing that's really given me a different career as opposed to a held back career is the fact that I think a lot of, I feel like I was about to say shots fired. No shots are being fired, but the reality is that when you look at some of our more prominent professionals, particularly the independent ones, they have come from corporate. If that is music industry, entertainment industry, corporate high profile brands. And I think those industries are quite difficult to get into. Um, and I hold my hands up. You have to an extent, be accountable for um, your mindset and what you tell yourself. And I've always been conscious of the fact that, one, I had my son when I was 25. Um, so I had very different responsibilities very early on, as I made that choice. And um, I didn't fit into what I thought typical publicists, marketers look like. White, blonde, had the ability to stay out of all hours at night, those kind of things.
Mm.
And also, I never worked in corporate spaces. My passion has always been working in places where I know I can make a difference. So, whilst I do a lot of lifestyle work now and a lot of work with the Black communities, like my roster is basically Black.
Mm.
Historically, I worked in education. I worked for an examination board. I worked in housing. I've worked with some of the biggest housing providers in the country, doing comms, particularly internal comms, which I love. And, sometimes in those rooms, you're the only one,
Yeah, I've been in those sort of situations very often throughout my career, so I understand that. Yes.
Yeah, but have I consciously been aware of being held back? I do assume that, certain things would have been afforded to me, certain promotions would have been afforded to me if I wasn't the melanated, dark-skinned woman that I am. But also that has been a blessing because it spurred me to start my own business and give myself that autonomy and freedom.
Yeah.
So I'm not ignorant to the fact that, there's probably times where, for example, I worked for a housing association where I worked with them for about a year and a half, doing all sorts of stuff. And then they recruited someone for that role because I decided that I was done doing the contract. That woman was white. And there was a kind of weekly meeting with the MD. And despite being there for a year and a half, I was never invited. When she was employed, the first week she came, she was invited into that meeting.
Wow.
And one of my white colleagues came to me and said, how come she gets to go to the meeting when you never have? And this is unprompted. She's obviously observant. And I said to her, why do you think it is? Now, a real argument could be that that person was permanent or whatever. But once someone is in charge of your internal comms and is responsible for how you're presented to your organization, it's really important to keep them close. And I really take my relationships very seriously with my MDs. I consider myself your right-hand person when I'm, because I form relationships with everybody from assistants to facilities. I understand what's going on in your organization. And my job is to make sure that you understand what's going on in your organization. So I see elements of it and I challenged my managers on it and they couldn't give me an answer.
I bet they couldn't.
But we know.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, that's an interesting example. That's an interesting example. Thank you. I'm just going to ask you if you witnessed or experienced sort of racism in the workplace. So that to me was definitely like a microaggression and quite obvious because how have you been there for a year and a half and not had the meeting and this person comes in and they're having it within the first week or two? Yeah, come on now.
It was literally the first week, Ebony. Like, no, but I think my first microaggression was, well, my first memorable one was I was about 17 and I'd been invited to come in and do an interview for a production company. And you see my name, Juanita Rosenior, in a really weird way, it's ambiguous. I'm Sierra Leonean, West African, but a bit ambiguous. It's not immediately obvious where I'm from. So I went to this interview, really excited. They opened the door and they said, oh, said, hi. Said, are you okay? Said, oh, you weren't what we were expecting. I said, oh, what were you expecting? They said, oh, we were expecting someone who was Spanish or Portuguese. So I give them the benefit of the doubt. At the end of the day, my first name's Spanish. Cool. Get into the interview and the guy's like, so tell us about your experience. I was like, okay, well, I presented for the BBC. I write here. I've been published here and whatever. Oh, well, you don't need to brag.
Wow.
I said, I'm not bragging.
So I'm thinking my experience is me bragging. This is my resume, sir. This is my CV. This is just what I've done.
I don't need to brag. Exactly. I don't need to brag. You asked me a question. I'm answering the question. Anyway, got to the end of the interview. As soon as I got home, just emailed and I just said, look, it's quite obvious that, like you said, I wasn't what you were expecting. And it's quite obvious that you're racist. So even if you were considering me for the role, I don't want it. So
well done to you. Well done to you.
I've been just realized because as I get older, I consider myself to be direct. And sometimes, and again, that's another thing that we have to deal with as women. I've experienced many a microaggression in the workplace where, particularly with white women, where I'm quite direct and clear. and let's distinguish it properly, Ebony. There is a difference between being clear and being rude.
Yes.
There's a difference between being direct and being rude. There's a difference between challenge and being rude. So I've had many of an experience when I've been in a room and people, I suppose, just think because I am confident in what it is that I'm saying at a given time, they'll say to me, well, I think they're triggered.
Yeah.
And I've had to take them aside and say, look, you don't have to like me, but we have to work together. Exactly. So let's sort it out.
Sort it out, please, and thanks. Yes.
Yeah. So so I just think it's par for the course. It's not the nicest thing, but I've got to a point where I am always aware of how I can potentially come up against it in the workplace.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older, I've gotten more familiar with myself. Oh, shall I tell you another trauma story? So when I worked at this story really changed who I was, because I thought that, the way to get ahead in life, and I do believe that to an extent, is to be nice, right? So I was working at this examinations board and we were launching a new science project, a new science curriculum. And I went on the website and there was a link, a really small link. And when you clicked on it, it was dead. So I had to make a decision. Do I remove the link so people don't go to a dead page and we look silly? Or do I leave the link? And I thought, actually, it's probably better to just remove the link. At that point, my manager, white woman, came up to me. I explained what had happened. And she then proceeded to scream at me in an open plan office.
Oh, wow.
Who do you think you are making those kinds of decisions without asking me?
Wow.
Now, this was the first role I'd had after having my eldest son. And I don't know what it's like for some people, but I think for most people, or I've had experiences with other parents who have said, it's a very having children really makes you reevaluate who you are.
Yes, it does.
And it's not something that happens overnight. Those things can take years to acclimatize to understanding who you are now you're a parent. And when that happened, I was just really getting back into marketing roles. And I was really sensitive. I think that one thing, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but I think that marketers, we get a lot of blunt trauma because people always have a comment on what it is that we do. People always think they can do what we do better.
Yeah.
People think that
always
we create posters and we're not a strategic resource. So, and I'm someone that am very much about doing my best by people. So I was really upset, but she taught me, I'll never forget her name, and I won't say her name, but she taught me that never again would I allow anybody in the workplace. There is never anything that you could ever pay me that will allow you to speak to me in that way again.
Yeah.
And, other people have tried it. And thankfully that's built that muscle where even if I don't immediately come for you, because I'm someone that likes to process, and come for you sounds a bit strong, but it is what it is. I will address in the most professional way, in the the King's English, that actually it's really important that respect happens in the workplace. And you address that. And I'm not afraid to be known as the aggressive Black woman because, again, that says more about you than it does about me.
Absolutely.
So I think to come back to your question, there are so many incidences. There's so many instances.
Shame, isn't it? It's really interesting because obviously I talk to different people and everyone's got different experiences. Some don't have any as much or at all. So you've got some who've got a lot, and it's just, obviously it's your lived experience, isn't it? So it's going to be your journey. But I'm really sorry that you had to deal with that, particularly coming back after having a baby and getting back into the workforce. You're already kind of working with your confidence issues. And then you've got someone who comes in and tries to berate you in front of the entire, office, like open plan office at that. Like, clearly she shouldn't have been in that role either. and you were actually looking at for the organization. So it was interesting. You can tell it's lost in translation what you're trying to do. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
unfortunate in that incident, and we'll see the others that you shared as well. So I appreciate you sharing them, and clearly you handle it by speaking out. Because I ask you, my next question was, how was it handled, and have you ever wished you spoke up about something? And clearly you're quite vocal, so yeah, I was like, you really done that
Yeah.
bit.
And there was a period of time that I felt a bit ashamed, like, oh, you're a bit of a troublemaker.
No way, speak
You're
up.
not afraid
Not a
to say.
troublemaker. It's the way we've been
Absolutely.
conditioned. Do you know what I mean? We've been conditioned to feel like
Absolutely.
if we speak up, we get called the aggressive black women. But it's like you need to have your own voice. So you just want to sit in
Yeah.
the corner, whimpering away, and not being able to vocalize how we're feeling in particular situations. No, it's not okay. And those
Absolutely.
instances are not okay. And it's interesting that you said it happened in education because I worked for Ofsted for a while, and
Oh,
I remember getting a report pulled from the Department of Education because they decided to write within the report that a group of young white boys were just friends, and then a group of black boys were a gang. That was actually used in the report. So I made sure I pushed back on the
yes.
report and said, no, this is stereotypical racist language. Why are
Absolutely.
the same number of boys you refer to that were white were friends, but somehow because they're black, they now become a gang. So that
Hmm.
report was pulled. But
Help them. Good.
but then
Absolutely.
there's not always people who will speak up like that. There's not always people in the position
Absolutely.
who are actually reviewing the reports and seeing what's happening. Because I was in the press side, obviously, I was looking to promote the report and I looked at it, I thought, well, this is
Yeah.
this. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So this needs to be
Yeah.
changed. But again,
Yeah.
there's some people who say who maybe don't always recognize their power within that. Because even me looking back now, I'm like, oh, actually, that was kind of a powerful move. But actually, at the time, I was just more like, absolutely not. I've got nephews, I've got my brothers. Like, you're going to say that any person is just in a gang because they're black? Like, come on
Not
now.
true.
You're just watching a load of
It's not
TV programs
true.
and taking on the stereotypes, and now you're bringing it to us. Like, no, it's okay. It's not true. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate
I
you
think,
sharing and speaking.
sorry,
Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to jump on what you just said and just say, I think that also it's really important for people to understand that they don't necessarily always have to speak.
No, that too.
Um, because I think it can be quite easy to be like, actually, like you said, sometimes there's things that happen, like, oh, should I have said something? And I don't think we're any better or any worse.
No, absolutely not.
It's a choice that we make.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
say that
So
all
I'm
the
not
time.
saying that that's what you were saying.
No, again, I completely agree with you because I've said that to people on the podcast. Like, not everybody feels comfortable speaking up. It also depends on you as a person, and you shouldn't have to always be, firefighting all the time. So with that, I'm just like, you
Yeah.
do what feels
Painful.
right. There
It's
is no one
exhausting.
size fits all. You do what feels right on your journey. If you feel compelled to speak up, then you do that. But sometimes if you're not, then it doesn't make you a bad person. You're just, you're going for your journey. It's fine.
Absolutely.
So I think, yeah, I
Absolutely.
appreciate you picking that point up as well because I did want to reiterate that. So I wanted to move slightly, a little bit lighter-ish into code switching now. Do you feel like
Ooh.
we can lead with our authentic voices in the workplace, or will we be forever kind of code switching? What do you think about that?
Um, I think I always have led with myself. Like, I haven't been one of those people who, I mean, like one of my campaigns was World Afro Day. I was the first
Okay,
publicist for World Afro Day.
amazing.
Um, and I understand that actually it's a very real responsibility for people where it's like actually there's circumstances that mean that they can't be who they are,
Mm.
particularly in the work environment. I don't think anyone gave me that memo. So I was a bit like, I will come in with braids, I will come in and do this. And, you
Yeah,
know, you know, and again in my head I just had to again make that distinction between what is professionalism and what is actually being authentically you, because those are two very separate things. And I
yeah,
don't think who I am, my thing is that I'm probably professional to a point, to a fault. So that my professionalism has never ever been a thing. But um, I think it just depends on the environment that you work in. Um, and that's one of the joys of being self-employed is the fact that, when I ran my first business, I used to wear black designer brands because I wanted to represent people. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean? Um, so I think maybe if I worked in corporate, then actually no, I'm lying to myself. I wouldn't feel the way if I worked anywhere else. I don't. The answer is, to be honest, I don't know. It depends on the environment.
I think that's a fair
Um,
answer.
Yeah.
I think
So
that's a fair answer. I think that's a fair point. I mean, I believe that. I think it does depend on your environment. Because I've worked in a lot of corporate environments where I definitely wasn't, being myself in that sense. I was just being my hat with my work hat on, I weren't gonna,
yeah.
there were different versions that you kind of bring to work with yourself. So that was a certain version that I had in that environment. So I get that,
Why
definitely.
did you feel that you had to bring a certain version as opposed to your chosen?
Well, I suppose to me, I've always grown up with this. My mum, she's Jamaican, for example. I would always hear her with her phone voice on, and I quickly early picked up that there's a phone voice and there is a voice that you had in the home, and there was also being in the environment made it quite was quite, what's the word,
Pick up how everyone else is behaving.
almost, but also at the same time, remember, I was the only black girl in my team. So for one, I'm already like, okay, I'm standing out because I am the only black person in this team. And then there's a slight weight on the shoulders that I felt when I was younger, like, oh, well, actually, I can't be making all of us look bad like this. That's not what we want to do. So I'm making sure I always bring my best self. But essentially, I wasn't necessarily being open. I wouldn't be like, busting joker like I would at home. I'd jump into my patwa or whatever. I'm not going to do that. Am I in this
In that
situation?
environment. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
in this environment, right? And one of my first roles was like working for the doctors regulator. So you're dealing with doctors, you're dealing with very
You
senior.
did all the hard stuff, man. Ofsted,
I did.
doctors,
I've done firefighting
regulator.
roles. Yes, firefighting roles. Because I've done a lot of crisis comms. So like I worked on like the Harold Shipman situation. So I've done a lot of crisis comms. So I quite enjoy crisis comms. I'm quite good at planning and getting it all together and everything. So yeah, I like
I
it.
love that you said that. I'm quite good at. I love that. Own
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I own it. I absolutely own it. But yeah, so what was so interesting about being in those environments was the people that I was around. I think it's funny, I was saying to my daughter the other day that if it weren't for me working in some of these environments with these white people, I probably would have never eaten hummus. Okay. I said my dietary was not involved in hummus and the olive oil with a little whatever. That wasn't there. Okay. I've got my curry go, I've got my whatever. Do you know what I mean? I've got different food over here. So going
Yeah.
into
So
those
there's
environments
benefits.
is when
Yeah.
I became aware of those sort of things. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I do feel like to this degree, because you're going into an environment, you're going to have people that have their own pre-existing, microaggressions. That's their problem.
Prejudices.
But for me, I always went to make sure that I was putting the best foot forward, and I was always aware that actually your professional self is going to be slightly different from your at-home self, and that's okay. So I kind of had to deal with that. You woke up, you kind of raised in that environment. I was also raised on things like, I was quite young at the time, but still, Will McCoy, a lot of code switching going on
Yeah.
in there,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
you was quite, as a youngster, I was very aware that actually you can't just be like this in this environment, Ebony. Like, there's a reason why your mum code switched. There's a reason why all your family kind of code switch. So I kind of just fell in line, essentially. Now, moving slightly forward,
Makes
thank
sense.
you for that question as well, actually. I feel like, look at Juanita questioning me. Okay, fine.
Ask the journalist, man. The
I know,
journalist
you
came
can see
out.
that in a journalist's in you. She's like,
Sorry.
let me ask you. Yeah.
I
So,
said
when
that's
did you
the
become
risk.
aware of the color bias in the industry? Was you always aware? Like for me, because I was in my bubble in the corporate environments, and I'd see people in different departments of color. I wasn't necessarily aware of how biased it was until I started to go to more industry events. Then I saw like, oh my gosh, like you could see it because it was huge numbers of the industry. I'd be like, oh wow. I was always used to being the only black person in a lot of situations, but in this one, it was like, oh, that actual industry is like this. Okay.
I think because I haven't necessarily been really industry focused,
Mhm.
I just thought it is what it is. I mean, I suppose maybe a bit insular, but my environment was reflective of that. Again, always being the only black person.
Yeah.
I think that's why I appreciated with I think it's her name's Elizabeth Bankora. I think it's Bankora.
Panuka. Panuka.
Banuka. That's
Yeah.
it. So apologies, Elizabeth. But yeah, when she did her first conference, I paid my monies and went to that because I was really interested in seeing the experience of other Black professionals. It's the first time that I'd seen so many in one room.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm more aware of how white the industry is based on other people's experiences. Um, Again, particularly in those corporate spaces.
Yeah.
So do you know what it is? Don't get me wrong, Ebony, it hurts.
Mm.
It hurts. It's painful. It's exhausting. But rightly or wrongly, I think I've come to a position where I just accept that this is how it is. That's why I enjoy the word global majority so much, because it's a nice reminder that it's not necessarily. But yeah, it's not something that I've dwelt too much on, but maybe it's something that I've internalized that's prevented me from maybe taking certain chances. So even now, when I look at certain things and I'm like, yeah, I don't know that they'd offer that to me because I am so black back. And also I don't know that they would trust that someone of my experience, and I'm director level experience, has the kind of experience that they would consider appropriate. I mean, look, culturally, we know that stereotypical story, but very typical story of people coming from the continent who have got abundance of qualifications, and they're here and they are cleaners, and there is nothing wrong with doing those roles. Let's be clear about that. At the same time, you're not given or afforded the same privileges as your peers. That's why I enjoyed, there's a book by Nels Abbey, the name of it escapes me at the moment, where he basically writes as a white man with privilege, and talks about the experiences in the workplace. I remember when that book came out, I was so excited. Really gutted that I can't remember the name right now.
You got to send me that book title when you remember it.
Listen, it's coming. I'm so gutted that I can't remember what it is now, but Nels Abbey wrote it.
Okay.
So yeah, I just take it for what it is, and try not to let it permeate my psyche too much and paralyze me.
Yeah, I think that's the best approach, definitely. And I agree with you. Don't let it bring you down in that sense. Like for me, it was a case of just a bit of a shock because I was in my own little bubble, because I was working in my workplaces. Clearly, I was like the main person of color in a lot of teams and a lot of directorate meetings and things like that. But within the actual organizations, there were people of the global majority dotted all around. So, I wasn't necessarily looking at it like, oh, okay, this is an issue.
It's unusual.
Yeah, it's unusual or anything until I started going to more of the industry events. And I was like, oh, right, it is really interesting. And then also when I went to women in PR and I was on their board, it was like a sea of white women. And I'd be like, oh, this is really fascinating because it's women in PR. I was on their board as one of the first black woman on their board, actually. And I thought this is really interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
Wow.
So I became more aware of it. But moving slightly on, well, not that far on from the bias, because actually I wanted to ask you if you were aware of the ethnicity pay gap issues that, global majority face. Because the PRCA's Race, Ethnicity and Equity Board, they put out a report about this, about the ethnicity pay gap, giving some advice and things like that. But clearly there's an issue in terms of, global majority not necessarily being remunerated as well as their white peers. So is that something that you're kind of aware of? I suppose because you work for yourself, you can set your own fees, which is amazing. But is it something that you've kind of been like, okay, I've got to make sure that I am pricing myself at the right for peers, or how do you kind of feel about that?
Well, I never want people to think that there are so many vast differences between being self-employed and employed.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there is still that consideration that people will still be like, well, she's a lead black professional woman with cropped hair, big earrings, and all that kind of stuff. So just because it's not in an employed environment doesn't mean that people aren't necessarily thinking, well, actually, should I be paying you the same way that I would employ, someone from a Weber and Shandwick or a WPP or whatever, or pay you, I should say. And yeah, again, do you know what it is, Ebony? It's like so many of these things, I'm just like, it just feels like this is our reality.
Yeah.
Like I remember there was a Runnymede report that came out that David Lammy started, and then what's her name? Theresa May repackaged as if it was something new, but I'd seen it at least 4 or 5 years, not even 4 or 5, maybe about 5 or 6 years before. And the opening statement of that report, I will never forget it, was something along the lines of, she said, I'll never forget it, and then said something along the lines of, people are not employed. Black women are not employed, and women of color are not employed simply because they're black and they're female.
Yeah,
that's the first thing. That's within the first paragraph of that report. And in terms of things like pay gap, I mean, again, whilst I'm not, when I say I'm accepting of it, it doesn't mean that I'm resigned, but I understand. And the thing is that I think the only person who's not necessarily going to understand that is if you're green to industry, if you're just starting out and someone hasn't had that conversation with you, or you're not Black, or you're not a person of color. Because unfortunately, I call it, especially what I refer to as May 2020, as opposed to, and only because of trauma, I refer to it as May 2020. But it was a real embodiment of, I call sometimes our experience death by 1,000 cuts, because we are constantly having to be in an environment where we have to constantly make assessments, constantly be aware of actually our behaviors. Are we getting paid in the same way? Are we being treated the same way? We're aware of it all, Ebony.
Yeah, we are, definitely. And I think it's good that the PRCA have done a report. Those out there who are interested, go and check it out. But yeah, I think, like you said, we are definitely aware. And it's not necessarily, it's not on us. It's not onus isn't necessarily on us. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, the Runnymede report shows that it's, if you're Black and you're female, you're out here, it sounds like you're in trouble. So it's not, the onus isn't on us to necessarily change it, although obviously we're part of the makeup trying to push for change. But I always feel like the change has to come from those that hold the power, So
do we know what spurred them to write it?
They've been following this for a while because they've got the Race, Equity and Equity Board is the one that published it. So obviously they're clearly aware of the disparities within the industry. And so they wanted to highlight these and try to put out some tips for them as well. So they've also got like mentoring schemes as well, which I'll touch on a bit later on as well. But yeah, that's probably the driving force behind it, because it's clearly an issue within the industry,
This series is sponsored by the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. To learn more about REEB and its mentoring scheme, visit prca.org.uk/REEB.
So moving forward slightly, I wanted to get your thoughts on allyship. What does it mean to you? What's like a good example of allyship to you?
I think it's one that just goes beyond race. It's about looking at the individual and whether or not that individual, the potential you can see in that person. And it's about someone who I'd like to think that I'm a good ally in certain contexts. So therefore, my personal thing, Ebony, is I just want everyone to win. And sometimes it gets me into trouble because I pour into people and that doesn't always work out in the best way for me, to be honest. But I just think a true ally is just someone who is just really, they can see the potential in who you are and they're not afraid to open doors or use resources or give you advice that's going to make that difference to you and build your career. And interestingly, and maybe dangerously saying this, but I've found, especially more of late when I've been for self-employed for so long, but I found that white men are more my allies.
You're not the first person to say that. You're not the first person to say that, interestingly.
Yeah. And it might be because, the cynic in me could say, oh, it's because, well, we're not an immediate threat. So therefore it's okay to support a Black woman. But I know there has been times when I've been like, oh, wow, actually, you don't know me from anybody. And let me be clear, I'm not saying they're my only allies, but I'm saying outside of my community. It's like, oh, you don't know me, but you advocate for me in a way that with a power that I know only you can have. So yeah, I suppose that's my perspective on allyship.
No, thank you. I think that's really interesting. Now, motivations. Tell me, what motivates and inspires you to keep on going?
What you mean, sad my bills? Nah. I think really what motivates me is that I'm very passionate about my people, and I'm very passionate about the people that I work with. So I have a rule: I don't just take anybody on. I have to understand that, one, I can help you, and also I can see the vision. I have to believe in you. Otherwise, when you're getting on my nerves, I can't push forward. And I say that interestingly because I think people think that when you're, because I manage talent, people think that there's this stereotype of, you've got to have the talent that goes out and they're doing really like nonsense things and you're supposed to go in and clean it up and whatever. And actually, really, I consider myself like a business partner. So I see things that you won't see. I fight for your money the same way I fight for my own.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I tell my clients. So I'm motivated by talent. I'm motivated by, look at the beautiful work that you've created. How can I help you get in front of the people that are going to appreciate that? So yeah, what motivates me is I just want us to do well.
Yeah.
I think we deserve to do well. And I think sometimes even at my big age, I'm like, you're grown. You're still maybe a tiny bit naive, but I think it's not naivety. I think it's hope.
Yeah, I'm like that. I pour into people. I like to see people win, and I like to have hope. And I've had those questions where I'm like, "Am I being naive here?" But I'm like, you know what? This is the way God made me. I'm gonna just keep on rolling. Okay,
embrace it.
Okay,
Absolutely,
exactly. Keep on rolling.
Absolutely,
Okay? Who appreciate it will appreciate it. So no, I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing that. That was really, really, really good. So, what would you say you found the most challenging so far on your journey?
There's so many things. Being a business owner, being responsible for
Yeah,
people's salaries
yeah,
is a thing.
yeah,
And it's not been easy. I think probably my biggest challenge has been myself. The thing I always tell people is, oh, you should always give yourself grace. And I've had to learn, and sometimes I'm still not that good at it, but learning to give myself grace. Um, but
that's a really good one.
yeah.
A very honest and a really good one because that's something that I feel like a lot of us struggle with. I struggle with that sometimes, giving
Mm,
myself grace. So no, I think that's
mm,
a really honest answer, particularly when you're self-employed and things. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes you're harder on yourself because you are self-employed, and even setting boundaries with yourself is difficult too, right? It's just like, hold on, I did say I was
Stop
going to finish this
reading
time, and you're
me.
still doing it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's really hard, and it's again, like I said before, I'm not trying to throw shade, but I don't have a background where I've worked for some pretty big organizations, but I don't have the glitz and glamour of certain roles. I haven't worked for, I don't know, Sony or those kind of organizations. So the build is very different.
yeah,
And I think something that, which is why I appreciate you actually reaching out, Ebony, because of the fact that I think, and this is a assumption,
mhm.
this is what I assumed, not necessarily the case, but I think people find it more interesting to talk to people if you're working for Netflix or you're working for whatever. And I think the story about independent
No,
practitioners
I'm
is
going to come in
lost.
there and say that's not my story. So I'll let you finish. But yes, no,
No, I know,
no,
yeah.
I get
So
it.
I
Yeah.
think I'm not saying that's your story, but I
No,
think
but I
that
get what you
there are
mean.
people that it's like there is a particular level of added value because I
Yeah.
suppose it's because, people think that actually if you're in these big brands, when you think about it, coming back to that whole thing about being the only one, to kind of be the chosen one
Mm,
is a bit like, oh, well, actually, you penetrated in a way that is quite unusual.
mm.
And there's a lot of assumptions about resilience. But I do think that the kind of story of independent practitioners who don't necessarily have that background can sometimes get lost and
Yes.
not told as much.
I agree with you, which is also partly why I have this podcast because it's just like it's not about I'm very different in the sense like I feel like I take you for who you are. I've never been a
Yeah,
person who's been like dazzled by oh well you work for this company or you work for that company. I'm like well that's great, but to me I look at it differently. I look at it like when you work for a big company, having worked for Ofsted and big companies like that, moving the media is not hard. Okay, it is
yeah,
not hard. I'm sorry for those people out there. I'm really sorry. Yes, it does. It takes work. Don't get me wrong. There's strategy behind it.
it does.
There's skill behind it. Don't get me wrong. But once you've got a big brand like that, it's not really hard to penetrate the
It's
media.
easy.
It's
Do
easy
you
to
know what?
penetrate the media. But for those of us who are independent, who are building through startups, like for example, I launched Emma Mattress to the UK. Okay, that was a brand new, business. Those who are working with smaller, lesser known brands, these are the ones that I feel like, they should get more ratings because actually we're having to break past the ones that they're all looking for. Everyone knows about Netflix. Everybody knows about Sony. Everybody knows about McDonald's. Everybody knows about all these brands. You know what I mean? So it's like we're coming with something different. You're coming with some, like a patty brand or whatever you're coming
Yeah,
with is different. It's got to try and
yeah,
break its way through. So our job to me is harder when you're working with lesser known brands. And I've gone, I know that to me, I feel like that path, going down that path, nothing wrong with it. Like if you're a person who loves to work with big brands and that's what you see, then brilliant. Like I'm not taking anything away from you. I just feel
no,
like it's a different journey because I've worked for a big brand. I know what it's like when you have a brand that has no name and you're trying
yeah.
to get a name for it. That to me is quite hard work and it doesn't always get the recognition it deserves. So
Do
yeah,
you know
that's
what? You just gifted me. You just gifted me
oh,
because no, absolutely. Because because I write a weekly newsletter and or publication, and I've really been struggling with that idea of, you know, actually it is harder. And
it's
to hear someone
definitely
else say
harder.
it, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, okay.
it's
So it's
definitely
not just
harder.
me.
Yeah, but I think it's
Um,
interesting too because I had this kind of I remember being called to do judging. I've done like award judging before. I
oh
remember
no.
doing like giving back feedback on one. I remember it was really interesting. There's a white lady who was quite friendly with the agency that were up for this award, right? Um, and the agency that was up for the award was a very big agency. The campaign was a good campaign, but there was another campaign from a smaller agency that to me was more impactful because that campaign they had so much money behind it. It was a big brand. It was going to cut through. Whereas
Anyway,
a smaller one, the way it cut through to me was really impactful. So I was making that argument, but I know that she was making the argument for the other person because she's like, yeah, but this is, and it was a hundred. I'm like, if you got 100K to spend on a campaign,
of course you
surely
can
you're
do
going to
whatever.
get good results, right? That should be a given.
Well, you'd hope so.
You'd hope so with that amount of budget, but
Yeah.
also based on the brands that were involved, I knew that it would cut through. But it's really interesting because I do feel like a lot of work goes into those that are, breaking that mold. But that's just my opinion. Everyone's got their own opinion, but that's just my opinion. But I'm
And I
really
agree
you agree.
wholeheartedly.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought it's really, really helpful. This chat has been really interesting. Now, obviously you're self-employed, right? So I won't ask you from an employee perspective, but as with an employer hat on, to you, what makes a really good working environment and what does like good DEI look like to you?
Um, as someone, I mean, I'll take a lot of, I suppose, reference from my experience as someone who has been in the workplace. Um, I think it's just being open. Like one of the things that I loved about, I have a really small team, like a really intimate team, and you know, and even if you look at my roster, one of the things that I'm really proud of is that my roster goes all the way up to 63.
All right.
63. At one point, I had, a couple of people in their 60s on my roster.
Brilliant.
In my team, there's a black woman, there's a white gay man, there's a
Yeah.
straight white woman. Um, again, I think it's just about everybody having the ability to be heard. Everyone's going to operate in a different way. And another thing that I'll kind of mention, just thinking about other scenarios, is, I know other people that work in industry who are neurodivergent, for example.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's one that's kind of gaining some traction now in terms of being accommodating.
It is now.
But I think what makes a really good environment is just a case of it just makes things interesting. It's again, I don't know, maybe, and I talk about this with a colleague of mine at times where I think we almost sort of get each other because, he might be discriminated from a sexuality point of view, whereas, I've got, race and gender and whatever. But I think it is just it's about people and it's about can people do the job? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm 100% answering the question in terms of
No,
what the environment is because it's just natural to me.
yeah, I get what you mean. It's about building an inclusive environment where, people can be heard and
Everyone's
right?
invited, and
Yeah.
it's more about the fit. Do we have the same values?
Yeah.
Do I think that you're someone that's going to come into my business? Because my business is not like working for some of the big brands where you just come in and you just do your job and you leave.
Mhm.
Like this pays for my kids' piano lessons and all those kind of things. Like my business is a lot more personal to me than an everyday job.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking for is someone that's going to, it's more about the person, someone that's going to show me things that I can't see myself. Um, and that's willing to do the grind, who's going to come with me, you know?
Yeah. Like moving into your proudest moments, what has been your proudest moment? It could be like work, it could be personal, you could include a career highlight if you like.
I think my proudest moment, I instantly knew what it was. And it's just all the things I've been able to show my eldest. Um, his dad is employed, he's a surveyor, building surveyor. And I love the fact that I've had the privilege of being able to show my son two sides of the workforce.
Yeah.
I'm also proud of the fact that, even though we're no longer together and we haven't been for a good decade or so, we are family and my son sees that.
That's lovely.
I'm proud about the fact that my son, there was one time where I had an intern and unfortunately, she wasn't able to quite do a task that I was asking her to do. And I said to him, I was like, is it me? Maybe I'm not explaining it. So I explained it to him. He was about 13 at the time. He's 16 next week. And I said to him, look, here's the brief. And then he said, Mum, do you have a PNG? I said, you are my son. What do you know about PNG? I must be doing something right, and I just think there are so many things that being self-employed has afforded me to be able to be home for the majority of his life. That and my youngest.
Yeah.
Being self-employed, building a business that's six figures, like Ebony,
Amazing.
like
Amazing.
there are days, and there are a lot of days, particularly in 2024, where it's very easy to forget that.
Yeah.
But to be able to keep the lights on in my house.
It's an accomplishment. You're doing amazing.
So there's lots of things to be proud of.
That's amazing.
So thank you for asking that question.
Of course. I ask all my guests that question. I feel like we have to celebrate our achievements and we don't always. It's interesting because some people will take a minute and be like, oh, it's a good question. Like, what am I thinking of? Like, it makes you think about, what am I proud of? Like, it's time to revalidate yourself and be like, yeah, it's okay.
Absolutely.
You've done some great things. So, no, thank you for sharing that. Now, what are your thoughts about the industry and how it will evolve over the next few years? About AI, let's talk about that, but
in terms of PR, in terms of comms, in terms of
both PR and comms, because obviously there's a lot of talk around AI. I feel like the talk around DEI, based on what's happened in the United States, will that impact us? Will that, I feel like people have really started to, pull back on initiatives and their efforts already. So I see that might change. But yeah,
the thing that I was going to reach for. Because I know that I'm talking to other friends who are comms people who are like, they're strategically, like, I work with organizations that they're very core. I'm building businesses where the very core of what it is that we do is around what it is that who we are as a people, as a culture, our race. And I know that they're sitting down right now to look at, because things like the Fearless Fund, where they were taken to the American equivalent of the High Court because of the fact that they were giving funding to Black women. And it was considered discriminatory. We know inevitably whatever is happening on that side of the pond will trickle through to here in whatever shape or form, but it will come. So they're looking at actually, how do we still have the same mission, but we change the language in how we address that, which at the time I just thought was, and this was recently, we had this conversation maybe in the last month or so, and it was like, actually, that's a really interesting idea. In fact, TGRG is about to open a division. You're the first person I'm publicly telling this, called the Black Creatives Licensing Agency. Nice. And that's going to start early in the new year. And the reason for starting that is because I know a lot of Black creatives who their work is being taken and they're not necessarily being paid for it.
Yeah. For example, is that Faye Flowers recently and how Stormzy got
absolutely
involved, Bartlett got involved because people are ripping off people's ideas.
Absolutely. So what BCLA will look at is working with artists and photographers and filmographers, graphic designers, etc., etc. And it's almost like we're the Black Getty. So bringing those talents together and negotiating, because that's what I do all the time. I had to negotiate with a very particular big brand quite recently about the fact that they brought in some professional photographers and didn't pay them. And I had to speak to their head of D&I, who happened to be a Black woman. And we were able to have a conversation on a level because of the fact that we're Black women.
Yeah.
And she was absolutely horrified, and she made sure they were paid.
How on earth?
So,
What on earth? A big
yeah,
brand paying your photographers. Like, where do we do that? This is not okay.
absolutely. And the irony was that it was a Black woman leading the charge for the Black photographers not to be paid. But that's another story for another day.
Wow.
But again, I do those things again because, like I said, I want to see people win. I didn't gain anything from that other than the satisfaction of knowing that actually they're going to be more cognizant of what they're doing and what other people are doing in their name.
Yeah.
But also these photographers were paid.
Yeah.
So in terms of what's happening within the industry, I think it is going to get slightly more difficult for organizations like mine, where we are focused on amplifying our community. So to me, that is something that we're going to have to navigate, and it is not necessarily going to be easy. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I'm not going to lie to you, but I know it's something that we have to be cognizant of. The whole AI piece, I'm sorry, I love it.
I love
AI. I love AI.
Oh. I do as well. I'm not an AI hater. I really like it. I use it. Like, I find it really useful.
Yes.
I feel like it's tech, it's about using tech for good. And that's the side that I'm interested in. Like, I've worked with fintech companies and stuff like that. I like tech.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And I had to explain to my friend. I mean, I've got a friend who she's in her 50s. And like she's had a different comms experience to me in my 40s, to whomever who is just starting out in their career. And I know one of the things is, like, you're not a proper comms person if you're not doing certain things. And I think I had to explain to her, I said, do you know what, especially if you're using things like AI properly, the way that I'm learning how to use it properly, you have to realize AI is like a really fresh junior. You just like give them listen, can you do me a brief? And then you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's good.
A nice detailed brief. They'll come back to you. Okay.
Do better. I mean, let's pretend that you've got more experience than me. Like, where are we going with this? And this is why I can see why it's so easy. One, it's not going to eliminate us because there's no human element, even though it can be quite good when it responds, yeah? But there's no human element. There's no real experience. But I think if I had a hope for anything out of this interview, is that I wish I could just give people permission. Use AI. Because at the end, just use it.
Try
because
it out.
At the end of the day, it only spits out what you put in, and how you shape it, and how you tell it to go. And it's the same, like I said, it's the same as having a 20-year-old in the office and going, that's a really good start, but let's try this. So I absolutely love it, and I am never going to apologize for using it. And I understand it's still new for people, and again, people want to maintain the integrity, but you can only get out what you put in. So if you're putting in nonsense, that's you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think definitely use it. And while we're talking about AI, let me big up my friend Effie Kanuo, who actually has her own AI situation going on. Google Lila Assistant, okay? Lila Assistant, and that's hers. So it's owned by her. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, yay. Let's support her. So Lila Assistant, okay? Check that out.
I love that. See, you just made my skin like tingle, because I'm like, there's nothing that I love more. I'm assuming Effie's a Black woman?
Yes.
There's nothing that I love more.
Person. She's been on our interview. She's been on one of the earlier podcasts. Yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing that I love more. There's nothing that gives me more joy than seeing Black women do amazing things.
yeah. She's doing amazing. I support her Lila assistant, so check it out there. Okay, now
Go
moving.
Effie.
Yes, yes, definitely support, support. And I, like you, I'm all for like embracing AI. Absolutely. Now, looking back over your career, what key lessons have you learned throughout your career? Maybe two or three.
I suppose the key lessons that I've learned, I think I've mentioned some of them. It's okay to be direct.
Yeah.
Um, it's okay not to know all the time.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that I try and instill in, it's weird. Like as I get older, I turned 40 this year, and I get younger people come and ask me, like, oh, Juanita, I'm going through this. What do you think? And it gives me joy. And I was like, oh, wait, when did I become this person? I didn't think I was that
Yeah.
old. But the grays are telling me different, but okay, that's stress. Anyway, but I think just some of the lessons that I think I've learned is to trust myself. Took a lot of work to get to that point where it's like um, to trust and embrace that I know exactly what I'm doing. To have the confidence to say that.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I think people really do not understand. I'm going to forever say this, how unforgiving the work we do is.
Mm.
Again, like I've said before, people see a typo, it's very public. One of the things I used to hate was, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sending an email out, like an all organizational email out.
Mm.
Because if there's even the slightest thing, people are not backward in coming forward and telling you how you didn't do your job properly.
Mm.
We're a very public facing type of work.
Yeah.
So I think that's another lesson as well. Again, I think I've talked about them. Give myself grace. I'm human, make mistakes. And one of the things I had to learn as well is, like when you're proofreading, you stop seeing stuff.
Yeah.
Those things are natural for us. Um, you know, again, being direct is not rude. I think I've given all
Yeah,
of
I
the
think those are
lessons.
good. I think those are good key lessons that you've learned throughout your career that you shared with us. Now, what advice would you give to young people from the global majority that are considering entering the industry?
I would say I've seen a lot of young uns come into the industry who get very jaded and disheartened quite quickly. And I'd always say your feelings are always valid.
Hmm.
Um, I always say to people as well, make sure you acknowledge your feelings, but don't dwell there. And just keep focused. I always get told that how generations post mine are, I'm not going to use that term because I don't like it, but their level of resilience is very different.
Mm.
And there might be a desire for them to have the best of everything in the workplace.
Hmm.
I don't know if that necessarily translates to younger Black people. I think they still understand that they have to graft. But I think just continue it's not going to be easy.
Mm.
Know that. I think when you know that, then it at least sets the bar.
Yeah.
Um, you're not blindsided by anything. Um, I think another piece of advice I'd give is something that we talked about before we started recording. And I was saying this to a young woman that I met at some drinks last week. And uh, I asked her what she did, and she said, oh, I just work in HR. I said, excuse you? You just don't do anything.
Remove the just.
Just
Okay.
don't do, yeah, you just don't do anything. So sorry, what is it you do? Oh, I work in HR. And there's another woman that was sat next to me I would consider her to be a big time TV producer in this country, award winning.
Yeah.
And because she really is award winning, big time producer. And she said, so what is it you did in HR? And she explained. And she said, so start the sentence again. What do you do? oh, I work in HR and I just do. I said, and we were like, hello?
Yeah, delete the just, please, and thanks.
I said, you are not learning the lesson here.
Yeah.
So she said it again, and before we left, I said to her, it's really important that you advocate and embrace yourself in a way that we've just spoken to you. It's very easy to dismiss what we're saying as we're trying to gas you up. We're not. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And you need to understand, again, she's the only Black woman in her role. I said, you need to understand you are the only Black woman in HR in a multinational organization. For you to be in that position is not a small feat, right? But you absolutely have to advocate for yourself, because there are going to be times that we're not here to do that. So you absolutely need to take a hold of everything that we said to you, because you're the ones that we're looking to. You're the next set. So you never, and I said, and the person that invited us for drinks, I'm going to get her to watch you too. Never, ever in your life, no joke, I beg you, tell anybody you're just anything, because you're not. And I think that's the thing. I think I love the generations younger than me, because I think they're so entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And I think they are so, I mean, don't get me wrong, they have access to things that we didn't. I mean, they don't know what rotary phones are.
Yeah.
They don't know what it is to press 1, 2, what is it? 1, 2, 3 on the phone and get the transfer by Accurist is. They don't know none of that. But what they do know is they know how to go around using technology and whatever. Just embrace everything. Embrace everything. Do everything. You're allowed to make mistakes, and you can come back from them. It's not forever.
Yeah.
So those are the things, and
That's
plenty more.
Advice. That's really good advice. And where do you go for industry support, for example? Like, I'm a member of the UK Black Comms Network. I've been a
Which
member
is beautiful.
Say again?
What is beautiful? Guan Kamikwa. I can't even get the words out.
Yes. I love the UK Black Comms Network. I think it's great. But yeah, I just wanted to find out, where do you go for support? Because obviously you are someone that people go to for support. Where do you go for support?
I'm ashamed to say, I don't know. I think my peers. I'm lucky enough to have some peers who've been in industry a long time. Chat GPT at times.
Yeah. I love ChatGPT.
Listen,
it's my brethren right now. Okay.
Me?
Yeah.
Seriously.
We see each other. It's okay. We see each other. Okay.
Sometimes, do you know what my favorite thing is? Type into chat and say, based on what you know about me, I do that thing. I'm a very introspective person, so I'll ask it, like, what are my gaps? Because I spend a lot of time with chat. Again, like a work colleague, you spend a lot of time with them. They see things that you don't. But I'll ask it things, and it's got this. Listen, I'm like, oh my God, I feel seen.
You feel seen. I love it.
Seen. But yeah, I think that's something that I'm looking to do more of this year.
Okay, well, that's good. Hopefully I'll see you at some UK BCN events or something coming up.
Listen, invite me, I'm there.
Yes, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to let you know when the next one's coming up. It might be to the new year, so I'm going to make sure I let you know, okay? Absolutely. For sure. But for those out there who are looking for resources, just so you know, obviously there's a UK Black Comms Network. There are the bodies like the CIPR, the PRCA. And as I mentioned, the PRCA, they have a resource called PRISM, which is Public Relations, Inclusion, Support and Mentoring. And that is available to professionals from Black, Asian and ethnically diverse backgrounds. So if you're looking for mentoring, then check that out as well. So I'm moving into my final section, which is this mindset, okay? So I want to ask you, how do you deal with the internal mind war? Like, how do you deal with self-limiting beliefs?
ChatGPT. I'm not gonna lie, it can be quite debilitating at times. And again, like I've said in earlier, it's about owning that, and sometimes I have to have those moments. But it's not easy. I'm constantly looking for a source of kind of peace with that. So that might be listening to affirmations. I found this really nice affirmations playlist on Spotify, which I really like. Again, allowing myself to acknowledge, actually, no, I really do feel bad right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is just about taking that time to remind yourself of actually all the things that you have accomplished. Sometimes I forget it's just simple things like just play some music, man. Play
Yeah,
some
that
Motown.
too. Absolutely, absolutely,
Feel better.
absolutely. That's definitely one that I always
Um,
forget sometimes, and I'm like, oh yeah. But
yeah,
the
but
list of things that the feedback do like what has been given to me as a good idea, which I'll pass on to you, is to make a list of feedback, good feedback that you've had throughout the
oh,
years,
I've got a
whatever.
folder.
Yeah, just making sure it's somewhere
Got a
close so
folder.
that when you're having those sad moments or you question your abilities, you can kind of look at that and be like, what am I talking about? Oh, stop the
Yeah,
nonsense. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The
yeah.
irony is that I do have a folder, but I can't remember what I
But you don't
called
know
it.
where it is.
Can't remember
Well, make it digital,
which one is
okay?
it.
Make it
It is
digital.
digital. That's the thing.
No way.
That's the
Okay, so it's
thing.
just buried somewhere. It's buried
So,
somewhere.
and then I had this at one point where I was writing down all my achievements. This is
Oh,
on my
that's
desk.
cute.
And I think that's been on my desk for the last 3 years. I don't think I've opened it recently. So failing, but I'm
You are.
trying for 2025.
Yes, you are. You are. You are. Okay, well, that's good. That's good. Now, looking back over your journey, would you do it all over again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. That's really good.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Yeah. I think it's made me the person that I am. And I love her. Sometimes we struggle, but I do love her. I'm proud of her. So
I
yeah.
love that. Absolutely love that. Okay, my last two questions. What's the best and worst advice you've been given?
Ooh, best advice I've been given is essentially don't play your hand before the other person does,
Hmm.
particularly in negotiating. So I have to negotiate a lot of contracts for my clients.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things about what it is that I do, where clients come to me where they're not getting paid or they're getting paid like a 50 quid, 100 quid. And then I'm able to negotiate for them right up into the thousands, tens of
Oh, yeah.
thousands. And yeah, it's not, don't play your hand first. What do you want?
I like. I'll be coming to you for some negotiation tips. I like.
Bad advice. I can't think of any. I heard something recently where I saw someone said, if you're in a period of crisis, don't answer the phone from an unknown number.
Okay.
And that's to me
Hmm.
not the strongest advice I've ever heard. And look, earrings falling all over the place. Not the strongest advice I've ever heard.
Hmm.
So I think that's bad advice.
I think it's an
But
interesting advice. I suppose it's depends on your situation, doesn't it? Because if you don't know the number that's calling you, maybe they were thinking it's a debt collector or something. They were like, if you request, it's the last thing you need is a debt collector calling you from
an unknown number.
yeah, an
Yeah, I
unidentified
think,
number.
but more from an organizational point of view, I think that
Yeah,
actually
that's
there's just
different.
not,
No,
yeah.
no. From a personal perspective, maybe, but if you're professional
Yeah,
health,
there's many a number I don't know that I don't answer.
yeah, I think from a
Absolutely.
personal situation different. For professional, absolutely, you cannot operate like that. It doesn't work that
Yeah,
way. You just got to be able
yeah,
to contain the situation. Absolutely not. Don't do that. But no, thank
yeah.
you, thank you. And my last question for you is: do you have any rules that you have implemented along your career journey? Like I remember when I first started out, I was very much like, okay, if I can't move up within this organization, I'm out and up. Like I'm not going to let anything kind of stop me in that sense. Obviously now I'm self-employed, so I'm more about like you, a sense of trying to make sure I work in places that I feel like I can add value. And I'm also
Yeah,
very fussy about who I work with now. Like
absolutely.
very fussy about who I work with. So yes.
I think inadvertently there's a rule that I like. There's a woman called Lovia Jai Jones. She again, I keep forgetting. I remember all the authors' names and forget their books, Forgot the name of her book. Anyway, she has a rule where it's like she has like 3 or 4 criteria that she works to. So if I do this, is this going to amplify me in my business? If I do this, is this going to make me happy? If I do this, am I going to make the kind of money that I need to make? And she's got another rule. And I really liked that because I'm someone that tends to go by passion and by my heart. And I think that's more of a rule that I'm going to have to implement more, which is actually strategically. I'm always forever being strategic for everybody else. And sometimes I neglect to do that for myself.
Yeah.
So I think it is about looking at, if I'm not getting, because and I always tell my talent clients this, sometimes an opportunity isn't always about money. It's also about looking at actually how else can I benefit from this union in a way that's not going to be too much to the detriment of myself. So I think that it is about, just I think it's about I think that's the rule. Be clear on, are you going to spend the next 6 months regretting it? Or is it going to be of benefit to you? So I think that's the kind of rule that I'd give you. There's probably more, but not that I can remember.
It's a good rule. It's actually a really good rule. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for joining me today and sharing your journey with me, Juanita. It's been lovely speaking with you. For those who want to connect with you, where can they find you?
So they can find me on my personal blog. I'll give you the URL so you can put that in the show notes or whatever. They can follow me at TGRG UK on Instagram. That's our business handle on Instagram, and you follow me on LinkedIn.
Right.
So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for coming on. It has been a pleasure speaking with you today. Now, of course, I will be back with some more wonderful people from the world of comms and PR very, very soon. Until then, stay blessed and bye for now.